I'm Tim Anderson. I am the executive chef and owner of Nanban, a Japanese soul food restaurant. We mainly cook ramen, but all kinds of other izakaya dishes. And it's kind of a Japanese fusion with London flavors. So we have a Brixton branch, and we use ingredients from Brixton Market. Here in central London at Seven Dials, we use flavors from all over London and all the diaspora communities within it. So it's not your granddad's Japanese food, but we call it Japanese dishes with local flavors. And so today we're going to make one of our sort of signature dishes here at Seven Dials Market. We call vegan Ramen Siciliano. It basically combines a sort of classic Japanese vegetarian broth, mushroom dashi, with one of my all-time favorite Italian dishes, caponata, which is like an aubergine, tomato, olive, and caper relish. And it's a real umami synergy bomb. It's fantastic. You may know dashi. If you've studied Japanese food at all, you should know dashi. If you don't know dashi yet, you need to know dashi. So dashi is maybe the most important ingredient in all of Japanese cooking. It's very simple. It's a broth, but actually made more like an infusion, like a tea. And traditionally, it's got two key ingredients. One is kombu, which is dried kelp. And it's lovely. It's got a really fresh sort of ocean flavor and lots and lots of umami, lots of naturally occurring glutamate. And then the other ingredient in traditional dashi is katsuobushi, which is tuna, small tuna that have been dried, smoked, and fermented repeatedly until it resembles chunks of wood. And then those pieces of tuna that are really, really hard get shaved into paper-thin flakes. And those get soaked into hot water, and you get this very, very, very savory, but also very light broth, and that's called dashi. Now, this is a vegan dish, so we're doing it without katsuobushi. We are still using kombu, and there's a lot of different ways to make dashi, but you want to keep the temperature fairly low. You never want to boil dashi because you lose a lot of the flavor and aroma. We're just going to break the kombu, get it in a pan. There's a white powder, which I can't remember the name of what it is. You would know. Yeah, some people say wash it off, but I say no because I think there's a lot of flavor there. Yeah, it's full of umami. So put that in a pan. And then instead of katsuobushi, we're going to use dried mushrooms. Now, dried mushrooms contain a compound called guanylate. It's very, very, very umami, and when you combine glutamate and guanylate, you get this synergistic effect. I have a sensory scientist friend named Barry Smith who always describes the effect as 2 + 2 = 8. You get more bang for your buck in terms of the umami when you combine different umami ingredients. So we've got very traditional dried shiitake. And by the way, the drying process concentrates and develops more guanylate within them, so they're more savory. And they've got an amazing aroma too. So those go in, and then not traditional, but really delicious, we've got porcini mushrooms also, which have this just fantastic aroma, and again, more umami. We're all about building, layering umami. So the easiest way to make a dashi is to cold infuse it. So you just pour cold water over your ingredients and leave it to steep for at least 12 hours, I'd say overnight. If you can do 24-hour infusion, that's even better. What we do here, it's quicker and you get a great flavor out of it, is to set it over a low, medium heat and gradually bring it up to a very, very low simmer. You never want to boil it. You want to keep it in the sort of 70 to 80 degree range. Once it gets to like a bare simmer, switch it off and let it steep for as long as you have. The longer you let it steep, the more flavor, the more umami you'll get. It's also great because there's other uses you can get out of the ingredients once they're done. You can turn the kombu into tsukudani, which is like a braised, almost like a seaweed pickle or a jam. It's very sweet and savory. And the mushrooms you can use as normal mushrooms. They're awesome. So the dashi will go on. We'll come back to that later. And then we'll make the caponata. Now, caponata is, of course, not Japanese at all, but it works really, really well in a ramen. I was trying to think of something that would give a bit of fat and body to a ramen broth, because that's awfully hard to get in vegetarian or vegan ramen. And I decided on caponata because there's a lot of olive oil in it, and that gets soaked up into the aubergine, so you get this really, really rich, silky texture in caponata, and you get a lot of umami from the tomatoes and other ingredients that are in it. So, very, very simple. We're going to start with onion, celery, and fennel, and those just get sort of roughly chopped. The other thing I like about caponata is it's not fancy. It's real sort of rustic comfort food. It's quite ugly, actually, which I like. This goes into a pan with olive oil, which actually I think works really well. I don't know why. I've always found olive oil and olives in general to have a really good affinity with Japanese ingredients like soy sauce and miso. So onion, thinly sliced. All right, some garlic. Quite a lot of garlic, actually. Okay, then the aubergine. This needs to cook for quite a long time in order to really soften it. I really don't like aubergine that's got a bit of crunch to it. This should be, again, really soft and silky. Imagine like the pork belly that you'd usually get on ramen, the chashu. This is what we're using to take its place, in a way, and give it that sort of luxurious, fatty, soft mouthfeel. And those go in to braise for about an hour till everything's really, really nice and soft and squishy. The dashi, after it steeps for about an hour and cools down a bit, we season it. This is called a tare that we add. Most ramen shops will have a tare separate from the broth so that the seasoning stays consistent, but we just keep an eye on it and taste it. This tare is very simple, but it's again all about adding more umami. So it's a little bit of sake, a little bit of mirin, and quite a lot of soy sauce. So soy sauce, of course, gives you the salt that you need, but also it gives that really rich, deep flavor, and it complements the mushrooms perfectly. So it's very, very dark. And then we've got everything else ready to go. Ramen's really an assembly job. The cooking is quick and simple. The caponata, when it's finished, again braising for about an hour or two, comes out looking like that. Like an aubergine relish, really oily, really rich. Everything's cooked down. All those flavors come together, the celery, the olives, the capers. And this, by the way, is good hot or cold. If you're making a big batch, you can have it just on crusty bread or couscous or pasta, whatever you like. It's delicious. We also take the caponata and we blend it to a puree. And this will go into the broth almost as like a secondary tare. So this is everything that's in the caponata. Once it's soft, whizzed up, and it's really, really silky and smooth. It has a really lovely texture. A bit like baba ganoush, because that's quite a bit what it's like. And again, more umami in there, because all of those vegetables and all those tomatoes and the capers and olives, they'll have cooked down, and they're going to amplify the umami in the broth as well. So we got a few toppings we need to prepare. Some padron peppers, which we use because shishito are too expensive. But they go into the fryer, and we just cook them for a minute or two. And they're just, ramen is all about sort of contrast and how there should be something a little bit different with every bite, but it's also got to slurp up well. So when you go in for the noodles, you get a little something extra. So toppings are important, but it's not all about the toppings. These are just something so that as you're eating it, you go, oh, there's a pepper, and this is nice and sweet and fresh and a little bit spicy. It keeps your interest in the bowl as you go. And you really want these to keep their texture. They don't need much time at all. And they'll also continue to cook in the hot oil that's on them as they rest. We've got to talk about the noodles. So the broth is sort of what gets all the attention in ramen, but the noodles are just as important, if not more important. They've got to be real ramen noodles, and what that means is wheat noodles with alkaline salts in them called kansui, which is a solution of sodium carbonate or potassium carbonate. And what it does is it changes the gluten structure in the noodles, and it gives them a really strong bite, like a bouncy texture. It's not the same as al dente pasta, which is more brittle. This is really strong, and it sort of snaps back between your teeth. So if you're making ramen, you have to use proper ramen noodles. Fresh if you can get them, but dried are okay if not. Just check the label and make sure that they've got those salts in them. Ramen is quite simple, but it's also quite precise. You need to cook the noodles, again, so that they're al dente, so they have a bite. But remember that they're going to continue to soften in the broth. So cook them a little harder than you might normally. So for us, with these noodles, it's 1 minute and 20 seconds. Get it ready. Noodles in the basket, in the water. Give it a stir. Ramen also needs to be served in a proper ramen bowl. Don't try to use a cereal bowl for ramen. You need something deep that'll keep the noodles submerged, that'll hold all the toppings, that'll keep the heat, very importantly. So we're gonna put a nice big couple of spoonfuls of our caponata puree in the bottom. And then it's all about time, and then you kind of gotta wait. When the noodles are almost cooked, we got 30 seconds left on the clock. We'll go in with our hot dashi, seasoned dashi. Boom, boom. And you can tell by looking, actually, the dashi is quite thin, which is why we're adding this puree. Give it some body to help cling to the noodles. Stir that up. Give it a quick taste before the timer's up. Wow, that's actually amazing. It's really rich. It's almost like an aubergine marmite type flavor. Okay, timer's up. Drain the noodles well. Get all the water out. You've seasoned your broth perfectly. You don't want any extra water to get in there to ruin that. Tip it in. Use your special golden chopstick to toss the noodles through so they don't stick together and they start to pick up that broth. Okay, and now it's all about the toppings. So first of all, we've got our lovely actual caponata. So that's going to go on top, give it some lovely texture to pick up the same flavors that are in the broth, really. So ramen always has a flavored fat or oil that goes into it. It gives it aroma and gives it more mouthfeel. Sometimes it's just animal fat, chicken fat, or pork fat. Sometimes it's garlic oil, sometimes it's sesame oil, sometimes it's chili oil. We use nori oil. So nori is a type of seaweed, most famous for being from sushi. This is actually aonori, which is the green flakes of nori that you get on dishes like okonomiyaki, yakisoba, things like that. It's really, really umami. It's got a really, really rich flavor. We just blitz it up with oil. It comes out looking like olive oil, and it gives a great extra layer of flavor to this dish. So we got the peppers, and they're a great texture as well because they really pick up that broth well. We're gonna shave some fennel, and this is just to give it some freshness because it is quite rich. Whoa. All right, now we're just basically adding texture here. And this is the same noodles we use in the broth, but fried. Then we've got another sort of secret ingredient of ours. These are shallots that have been fried very, very slowly, so they dry out during the frying process and then go crispy. And they'll start out crispy and crunchy when you eat them, but as they sit in the broth or fall into it, they'll just become really, really silky and smooth. Just like the aubergines, actually. So those go on top. We've got some lovely, fresh basil. Just gonna tear the rest here and there. And the smell of that, it's hard to beat fresh basil, it really is. But also you need something that lifts this because it is such a rich dish. And then lastly, mainly for visuals but also for a bit more aroma, we've got chili threads. These are dried red chilies that are run through a machine that cuts them into these very, very fine threads. And that goes on top. And as a bonus, this is a vegan dish now. If you left it at this is totally vegan. But we recommend it if you're not vegan or if you're vegetarian to have it with some pecorino cheese as an extra topping. And this again will just add this extra umami flavor on top and an extra salt as well. And of course, extra flavor is what we want. So that'll go right there on top. And that's it. This is probably about as much umami as you can get into a vegan dish. Okay, we're filming this now, so it's gonna sit here for a bit, but when you're eating ramen, you gotta eat it fast. It's gotta be hot, and those noodles gotta keep their texture. So don't let it sit. Dive in, slurp it up, eat it quickly. Otherwise, all of our work here is ruined, and you ruined it.